And joining us from Hampshire in England, we got Tim Boughton, who is a mindfulness-based cognitive therapist and psychologist, amongst other things, many other things. And funnily enough, or weirdly enough, Tim and I served in the same battalion in the British Army. Not at the same time. You'd left a good few years before me, but Tim, great to see you. Finally,
Right.
I heard your name before, but it's nice to put a face to the name, you know?
Hopefully all good. No, really great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Fair
And
enough.
thanks for Nick Boughton for connecting us, I think.
Yeah, it was good because I wasn't sure. I asked him about, and he said he'd do an intro for us. Previous guest just a few episodes ago, and another friend of yours, Charlie Herbert, another general. All these guys are generals now.
I failed somewhere miserably down the line.
Yeah, I failed upwards and outwards, shall we say? And so it's interesting to get you on because it's never ceases to fascinate me what guys get up to after their time out in the battalion and in the army. And what you've done is pretty impressive, I have to say, Tim. So we're going to talk today about a bit about mindfulness, but not your airy-fairy new agey stuff. We're talking about PTSD and trauma and that kind of aspect. Is that where we're going?
Yeah, I think... So look, I think that I had this great phrase by Bill, the guy that does the birds. I can't remember his surname now. But he sort of said, look, mindfulness has been taken over by the Reiki flakerati. You know, this great phrase that it's just, Zen Buddhism and sitting there and everything else, which, to be fair, when I was really starting out with it, I sort of had that same sort of view. But for me, it came from a place of desperation in some way, shape, or form when I was going through a bad sort of mental health stage when I left the military in 2008, and I was transitioning into a different world of banking, which had its own sort of challenges and everything else. And I remember being, talking to this lady, and she said, look, you've tried most things, you've tried everything else, you tried mindfulness. And I was like, gee, I'm not going to get into that. And so I sat down and I read a book called Finding Peace in a Frantic World by Professor Mark Williams. And it's basically the 8-week MBCT course, the Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy course, which we can talk about how that came about later. But, and it sort of it's a fairly easy read. And to date, I've given out over 150 copies of that book to people because it was quite transformational in terms of how, I viewed my own feelings, my own sensations, the way that I was sort of working. And then that just grew. My own practice grew. I sort of get up every morning really early and sort of do an hour of mindfulness practice, and that may to some seem like absolute torture, but to me, it's just this ability to suppress, Control Alt Delete on your day, and just sort of have a free memory to sort of work with the day. And it sort of grew from there. And then I sort of suddenly started having people coming to me from a military background saying, okay, what's this mindfulness all about? And I started to sort of share that journey with them. And another good friend of ours, Ed Home, who you'll know from the regiment.
Previous guest
as well. Oh, right. Brilliant. And so he's now, doing what I did, doing the 2-year mindfulness degree at Oxford.
Yeah, we were talking about that on the phone about 2 months ago.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he was doing the same thing as you've done.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really fun course.
Yeah, well, fun being an interesting word. I wouldn't say
interesting.
It's really interesting. And it goes deep into a lot of things, whether it's Buddhist psychology, whether it's the basis of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, how you do it, how you teach it, how you sort of give back, all sorts of stuff. But realistically, then I tried really heavily to take it into a military environment, because this whole idea that mindfulness is all about sitting in a field or just sitting looking at the sun or whatever it is, or reciting poems, or really just tied to Buddhist psychology is something that we need to demystify. The whole idea of its genesis of where mindfulness came from was from John Kabat-Zinn in the 1970s, who used it as a treatment for depression in patients and relapse for depression in patients. And then that grew, and then that changed, and then you had this bridging of traditions between, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a psychological approach on one side, then mindfulness-based stress reduction, which John Kabat-Zinn came up with, for the sort of Buddhist teachings on the other. And from the mindfulness-based, sort of side of it, we have an attitude towards an experience. What are our thoughts and feelings? And the foundations of Buddhist psychology. And yet on CBT, we have all of that conceptual frameworks for understanding distress, behavioral, learning-based sort of experiences, but also the evidence base of psychological treatment. So you end up with something, called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which brings together very much evidence-based and research-based rigor to a practice which the Buddhist, philosophy has been doing for many, many years, sort of 400 BCE, and has been a sort of thread, whether it's Tibetan monks, whether it's been Buddhist, Buddhists themselves, whether it's been, the more secular side of it. And what I wanted to do was to try and demystify this and say that, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is there for everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're a soldier, it doesn't matter whether you're an NHS doctor, it doesn't matter whether you are whatever you are. It has applicability across a piece. And what I was finding was that the initial reaction was, well, you're just helping people become better killers. You're teaching these techniques to people who will become better killers. And I was saying, no, I'm not. I'm teaching and trying to ensure that people become better people, better versions of their own selves. And the corollary of that is that they may become better at their job, whatever that job may be. And that's not for me to decide, judge, or whatever. But what I was finding out very quickly was that the sort of themes of mindfulness, whether that's recognizing yourself on autopilot, whether that's going from reactivity to response, whether that's working with difficulty, whether that's anxiety, fear, depression, whatever it may be, was hugely successful on elite soldiers. These people that were living in fight, flight the whole time, high, what we call autonomic nervous system arousal, ANS arousal, or SNS arousal, who were out of their window of tolerance. This band which, in normality, we go, we have an argument with somebody, we rise up in our feelings, but very quickly it subsides. This sinal wave within it, and as long as it stays within this window of tolerance, we operate in some form of normality. The difficulty comes when everything overwhelms us, be that daily life, be it financial issues, be it world scenarios, be it, what we've done within a military, and then we fly out of this window of tolerance and we go into fight, flight. And if we stay in it long enough, we get amygdala hijack. We end up with high cortisol arousal, and we operate, and it becomes the new normality for where we are. I can see your eyes glazing over already.
No. I've got a good question. That's all.
Okay. Well, shoot for your question, and I'll finish.
Well, that's the thing is, and I wonder if it's I mean, I'm not going to say it's PTSD, but it is a form of PTSD. It's when you're in the military as an officer, but at any level, any rank, when you've got responsibility, is what you call the high level of arousal.
Yeah.
That type of, not the other arousal. But,
sympathetic nervous system arousal.
Yeah. That let's say we're going, I'm with the family, I'm packing up the car, we're going on holiday. That's me packing for exercise or packing to go on operations. I'm at 100 out of 100 level of getting stuff done and thinking, and my mind's going crazy, even though it's completely benign, and the atmosphere is perfectly fine. It's like something just kicks in, and I go, like, I start getting a bit sweaty, I start to get nervous, and I wonder if that's just a response, if that's a response has been beaten into me, thrashed into me, and all of us actually, when we're going through the training, and actually when you're on the operations and stuff, it's the desire to do your job to the best of your ability, which requires jacking yourself up to that level of stress.
It's a really good point. So reactivity, it comes down to reactivity and response. Reactivity an automatic reaction in some environments is absolutely necessary, right? The TTPs we do, everything we learn, that automatic reaction, if you have something go wrong in a helicopter, you know your drills, you know what you need to do immediately. And then you follow through with, a period of calm and then a period of response into whatever that sort of action requires. But, there are some parts of reactivity that are really useful. But what we do is I liken it to, you sitting at a bus stop and looking at all the buses going by. You're trying to get on every single bus. Each bus is a thought, is something that you're thinking about. Actually, sometimes you just need to sit at the bus stop and let the buses go by, because you don't need to get on every single one that's going through. And what then happens is you then start to learn that you don't need to react, but you can respond. So what is the tactical pause between the thought in your mind that says, oh, I need to rush around doing this and this, to actually go, well, just hold on a second. What's the priority? What do I need to do? Do I need to do it immediately? Do I not? And actually to start responding to something. And one of the mantras that I came up with, and one of the mantras that I use a lot, and that I teach people a lot, is this idea of stop, breathe, reflect, and choose. And it goes to your point, and I'll give you an example. If you're going down the motorway or the Autobahn in Germany, you're going down that and you get overtaken and somebody cuts you up, what's your first response? Well, it's lots of this, it's lots of swearing, it's lots of everything else, generally.
Used to be.
Used to be, yeah.
Up until not that long ago.
Up to that long ago.
Yeah.
But if we basically say stop, what we do is we interrupt that immediate reaction between our limbic brain and our prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain, simplistically, that says, have we seen this before? Yes, you have. What's your reaction? Your reaction was this. Boff. So we want to interrupt that for a start. And the way we do that is by physically saying stop, because by physically saying stop, we interrupt that. And it takes a nanosecond to do. Then we breathe. The reason why we breathe is because it just calms down that fight-flight reflex. Breathing is always known to be an anchoring point for what we do in life. But, and that's a good anchoring point to use. Some people don't, trauma-related, but we can come to that later. But basically, it's to start bringing that reaction down. And then we reflect, okay, what's happened? That person's overtaken me. They might be going to hospital. They might be a bad driver. They might be having a really shit day, whatever it may be. But then we choose, do you know what? They're 200 meters down the road. I'm not going to react to it. I'm just going to have a calm day. I'm just going to let that happen. Now, for that to become embedded as habit, it takes roughly between 25 and 31 days. So whether that's sex, drugs, rock and roll, for an addiction, it becomes between 25 and 31 days. Interestingly, that time to break it as well, generally. So if you can practice that, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a car here, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about an argument with your spouse, it doesn't matter whether you're an argument with the kids, answering an email, phone call, whatever. I've yet to find an environment where stop, breathe, reflect, and choose just doesn't work. And it just creates this break from reactivity, that spike in fight flight, to one more of response. And the more we do that responding mode, we change the neural pathways within our brain. We become more aware. And there's a lot of work by Professor Amishi Jha on this whole idea of awareness. Where do we put our awareness? Is it in reactivity or is it in response? So, the more we can learn to respond in life rather than react, then the more zen we start to become.
Which is a very interesting, and I would say this is that stage in my life where I'm starting to reevaluate old patterns which don't work for me anymore. In fact, they haven't worked for me for a long, long time. So it's a good time now that I start to reevaluate, and especially when I see my kids acting like me, that's a real dagger through the heart. That's the worst thing. I think that's probably the most painful thing I've seen in my life, is when you see your kids acting like that. And I think, well, first and foremost, the big worry is, is it too late? Have I already screwed up my kid? So I don't think so. I really hope not anyway. But I can see my son doing that. I can see him picking up bad behaviors, which it's really bad. I want to talk about that as well. But it's just, I don't know if it's just me or if it's just for all men. The instant, if there's any kind of threat to my wife or the family, it's it's like all shields up, all weapon systems ready, and I'm ready. I'm pretty much ready to go. I'm ready to start swinging if necessary. And it's not really a very helpful situation to be in for me. But I know I'm not alone, because I speak to my friends about this, and non-military and military, they say the same thing. So I don't know if I'm particularly susceptible to it, or if it's a common thing.
So it's really interesting. What your reaction is, that the initial reaction is perfectly normal. It is that again, why it's called fight flight. You're ready, preparing yourself, ready to fight, to protect the family, to protect whatever it is you do. The difference is how fast can you then assimilate what's going on when you're in fight flight, catch it early, and then bring it back down. Very, very easily. It's very easy to allow that to go, ballistic, and that's when we get to hands to punching stations and all sorts of things, and we get ourselves into trouble. It really interesting question in what you're saying about your son. No, it's not too late. There's never a time too late. Here I am at my 50s now, and I'm dealing with people my age, younger, across a whole spectrum, whether it's families, whether it's operators, whether it's doctors, whether it's lawyers, accountants, whatever. They all come to me in this very high state of SNS arousal, where they don't know, they haven't got the tools to know how to get themselves down from there, because the stresses of normal life are impacting, whether that's finance, work, family, whatever, which keeps them in this position. And so without those tools, they don't know how to get back. And that, for some people, it could be running, it could be fizz, it could be mindfulness, it could be whatever, spending more time with the family, whatever that may be. But you need to identify and you need to practice. Friedrich Nietzsche said, what you practice, you become. If you practice that reactivity, you become that reactivity. If you take a look at it and then work out how you're going to put the tools and the habits in place to negate that in terms of that reaction, then that becomes your new tools and habits. And so I think that it's about, again, as Professor Amishi Jha said, it's about awareness. Where do you put your awareness? How do you go from this reactivity response? How do you make yourself more aware? And therefore, how do you then develop the tools and the habits to deal with that on an ongoing basis? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm much, much better nowadays. Is being much more relaxed about things. Funny, one of our old colleagues said, he made a joke the other day, is that he said, I've never seen you stressed out in your life, which is not true. I mean, I might have hid it well, but it was always there. It still is to an extent. And I don't know if it's stress is the right word. It's, I think one of the guests was talking about, what was he saying? I forgot the word at the moment. Hypervigilant.
Hyperarousal.
Hypervigilance.
Hyperarousal.
Yeah. And I saw a fantastic meme yesterday on X, and it was a video of a guy walking down a shopping street, and in his mind he's going, two guys over there. Yep, they're okay, they're safe. Three guys over there, they're okay, there's no threat there. Two dogs, both on leashes. He's walking down the road doing a constant threat assessment as to what's going on. And meanwhile, his wife is walking next to him. I forget some happy song she's listening to, and maybe, I don't know if that's just purely a male thing, but it seems to be quite common, because it certainly resonated with. I was reading the comments underneath on that particular meme, and every guy was saying, "Yep, 100%. That's what we do. That's what I do every. That's my response."
The question, the comment is no, it's not just a male thing. It can be across the board. But why do we allow ourselves to continue to do that? Why do we, why do we allow ourselves to be in this position of, hypervigilance and, hyperarousal when, we could be a lot more sort of sort of at ease with the world and at ease with what we've got going on? And the answer is that, if I take, if I take a glass, and where the water is, my life might be adopted, broken home up to here. And then we're filling up the rest of the glass with daily issues, whether that's finance, whether it's whatever, divorce, whatever it could be. At some stage, that glass is going to overflow. And if we allow ourselves to get to the edge and constantly bring ourselves back from the edge, that's when we're in, fight, flight the whole time. But what is the tap that we put on the side that allows us to turn it on, that allows us to get rid of this so we can go up and down? Going back to my thing of what I was saying before about window of tolerance, what we're trying to do with mindfulness is allow ourselves to get the tools and habits to stretch that window of tolerance so that our sine wave can be bigger within it, and actually we're fine. We don't go into fight flight. And that's where we need to try. That's what we need to try and do. And if we can do that, and by the way, the tap might be going for a run. It might be, it can be 1,001 things. And mindfulness is not the be all and end all for a lot of people. But if you can combine the cognitive element with it, and you can combine the, some of the Buddhist teachings with it, which have, some element of sort of relevance for it, for what it is, then we can change the way that we react and we become more responsive. And that's the key thing is how do we respond and take that step and go, do you know what? I'm not going to react to that. And actually, one of the exercises that we do in mindfulness is walking down the street. We say you're walking down the street, you're seeing a friend walks back the other way, you wave hello, and he walks by. What's going on in your head when you're thinking that? Oh, he might not have seen me. He's pissed off. Whatever it is. It's amazing how many thoughts people have that are different, and then you get them all together, and you say, well, what does this tell you? Well, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and behaviors are all different. But if I just change one of those, like, maybe he's having a bad day or I'm in a better frame of mood, the whole of that scenario changes in the way that it sort of comes across. So it is very much down to us to try and control how we have these thoughts and feelings and sensations. But to do that, we've got to be aware of, how we pick up the clues.
So when you mentioned the cognitive behavioral therapy aspect of it.
Yeah.
I've heard this, and I think someone's explained it to me before, but if you can explain it to me as well, so maybe this time it might sink in.
So the cognitive behavioral therapy is just one form of therapy, which was, invented by Beck a long time ago in the 70s. But the fundamental part of it is the ABC model, which is there is an actuating event, you then have a belief, and then there's a consequence. But what generally happens with us is that if we're not knowing of that or not aware of it and we're reactive, we have the activating event, somebody comes up to you and starts shouting at you, consequence is you punch them. Okay? We don't interrogate the beliefs in the middle. We don't sort of go, okay, what are my thoughts and feelings around this? What are my beliefs around, why this is happening? Now, I'm not saying you stand there with somebody doing it and you sort of think, right, okay, let me just interrogate my beliefs around. It is a very quick process which we do, but because we don't have that element of pause within the after the actuating event, before the consequence, we don't give our time and ourselves the time in the brain to sort of interrogate what those situation is. So, using that example, somebody comes up to you, you think you're going to punch, they're going to punch you, and you knock them out. That's a consequence. There could be 1,001 reasons in there that you're not aware of. Like he might be coming up to you in distress. He might be, he might have just, jumped out of a corner as a joke. He might have done whatever it may be, but you automatically go to right, fight, flight, bang, done. So how do we interrogate, this model around thoughts, feelings, sensations, and beliefs and behaviors? And because they're all connected, we change one, we change everything. And so the cognitive side is important in MBCT and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy because it brings that aspect to our thoughts and our feelings and allows us to interrogate them and allows us to see if they're real. There's a great phrase that thoughts are not facts, right? We have so many thoughts that we think are real, but actually they're not. It's just our mind interpreting it. And what mind does, by the way, is it interprets gaps within its knowledge. So have you ever, been to a party some time ago and you met up with a friend 10 years later and you said, oh, so-and-so did that at that party? And you go, no, he didn't. I said, yes, he did.
All the time.
Yeah. It's because our mind puts an interpretation of what happened at that party into your head. And so that's why it's so important to actually pause sometimes and go, what I'm about to do is not really what I need to do, or the thoughts that I'm thinking about are not real. And that has, real importance when you're dealing with depression, or when you're dealing with anxiety, or fear. This whole idea of false evidence appearing real, fear. It is something that, you're perceiving, which can be very debilitating, don't get me wrong, but actually in often cases is not real. But how do we know it's not real? It's by stepping back. It's by thinking about it. Am I really going to die here? Well, no, you're not. Okay, so if I'm not going to die, that's good. So what is going on? Well, you're just, you're reflecting on something that happened in the past. And that's where the mind is very good, is that people with PTSD are still living trauma they perceive to be still ongoing on a daily basis. And it's how do you sit down with them and convince them that that's not the case? That the trauma is over, they can live a daily life, and they can get on with what it is they're doing, which is why, after doing the Masters at Oxford, I then went on to study under, Babette Rothschild's teachings and Peter Levine, to look really at how trauma implements this, and how we deal with trauma, and use mindfulness for trauma. And that was specifically relevant with, soldiers in high performing, sort of regiments that really, had seen a lot of trauma, dealt with a lot of trauma. But the effect then was that they were coming back and it was being presented onto their families as well. So picking up a lot of issues with families.
I had a chat with a guy on the podcast a fair few episodes ago, and we were talking about trauma. And I've done, because it's quite interesting, because I get guests like yourself come on, and then we actually will do a session, or we'll do a session before the podcast, and we'll talk about. So I've got an idea of how they work, and we were talking about how I'd done some trauma therapy, and I mean I told another guy this story, another guest this story, and we kind of went on a different tangent because I'll say what I was going to say. I'll say what I say anyway, but. We're talking about trauma I can't remember how it came up, but it was to do with how everyone's going to have some sort of trauma and you don't know what it is. But he said to you, do you let that define you, or can you deal with it? If you let the trauma define you, then you're going to have to struggle with that trauma the rest of your life. It's a case of, can you deal with it and if you don't let it define you, then you can actually have then it won't affect you, and in the same way that if you weren't able to step away from it. Now, I understand that there's some things that are going to be extremely traumatic compared to, potentially what I went through. But I find that really quite useful, because I'd always thought that, and you're probably going to tell me the opposite now, which is fine. But I always thought that because I've been with family members who've been in, World War I in the trenches. My great grandfather, and I use this example quite a few times, but not just him, a bunch of other ones as well. And I think there's not really that much. I don't have that much to complain about, and so just be thankful. And that a bit like mindfulness, gratitude is another one that's got that bit of become a bit of a dirty word if you think about it like that, and it's more of a hippie new agey type of thing, but actually being mindful and being able to deal with something, because you've said that because somebody else had it worse than you doesn't mean to say that you can cope any better than that person, and you don't know how messed up that person was, but they seem to be okay, even though I know for a fact they went through some real horrendous stuff that we've never had to experience, but seemed to be able to deal with it. So I took solace from that, accepted, and was grateful to the fact that I didn't have to deal with that. And I thought, well, what I'm going through is nothing like that. So if they can do it, I can do it.
There is this view. I mean, people experience trauma. Trauma is no worse or better for people, no matter what they experience. Whether that's childhood trauma, whether it's trauma from military operations, or whether it's trauma from an accident. And there is an argument which I firmly believe is that a lot of PTSD is unfinished trauma. It's unclosed off trauma. You look at the natural world, right? You look at a gazelle when it's being chased by a lion or a cheetah, and when it knows that it's going to get schwacked, then it goes into what they call tonic immobility, which is this. It freezes. First of all, it'll go into a freeze mode. And then it'll go into fawn, which is die. It just accepts the fact that it's going to die, and it will just flop off on the floor. Nature's way of saying to the lion, it's dead, you don't want to eat it, move on. And so invariably, when that happens, they'll move on. As soon as that lion moves on, I don't know if you've seen it, but that gazelle will get up, it will start shaking. It will stay where it is, and it will just shake and shake and shake and shake and shake. That is nature's way of getting rid of trauma. That is nature's way of getting rid of all of the adrenaline that's in the body. And at the same time, its basic mind is just sort of processing that. But then what happens is that then once it's finished shaking off, it gets on with daily life and just wanders off as though nothing has happened. Yeah. But what we do in our world is if you have a car crash, then you have that ability where you're confused. People are pouring all over you the whole time. People are shaking you, shouting. You go, come on, wake up. Are you okay? What's your name? What's your this and that? And you're creating that environment where you cannot close off that trauma in that moment. And so you hold it, and the brain holds it. The brain goes, okay, right, I'll hold this, and I'll just work on with getting better, and then we'll sort of move on. And some people are very happy. You go, but you're talking about the First World War. Trauma was not an understood phenomenon in the First World War.
Shell shock.
Yeah, shell shock, cowardice, shot, the whole 9 yards. It was no wonder why people kept it quiet, didn't understand it, and worked through it.
Never thought about it like that.
Yeah, and it goes to a generation of why, our grandparents, even our grandparents, didn't want to talk about it from the Second World War side of view as well. That stoic sort of, right, I'll get on with it, I'll do it. Were they suffering? Outwardly, probably no, but inwardly, I can tell you, absolutely they were. And this is not a new concept. Pierre Janet in 1867 said there was a 3-step way of dealing with trauma. The first is stabilization and safety. The second is dealing with traumatic memory and recovery. And the third is integration. Why then, in 1867, did this guy come up with this whiz way of dealing with it that we are faced now with a lot of trauma practitioners that have never even heard of it? So what happens is you go to the NHS and you go and see the NHS, and the NHS will say, okay, you have some form of trauma, we'll give you 7 sessions, right? And what they'll do is they'll sit you down and they'll say, right, Tim, what's happened? What's everything? What's happened to you? And you can say, okay, I've got traumatic childhood, I've had this in the military, or whatever it may be. And then they then go, right, let's go straight into traumatic memory. Let's recall that event. Let's go through it. Let's try and desensitize you, and let's sort this out. What happens is generally it throws people straight back into trauma again, because there's been no stabilization and no safety. And the reason that I think the way I do things is so successful with, high performing individuals, whether it's elites, whether it's sport, whether it's military, is because I set that stabilization and safety. When they're up here, I wait to bring them down into the window of tolerance where everything they're taught can then be understood. The brain is functioning, it's aware, it's receptive to what's going on down here. But the NHS isn't doing that, if you think about it. They're taking people who are up here, and then whilst they're up here, they're going, right, tell me a trauma incident, trauma memory. You're not in a place to talk about it. You're so hypervigilant, to use your phrase. You're in such a space where you don't want to get there. And so we've forgotten how to deal with trauma properly, because that stabilization and safety can take anything from a few hours to I've had somebody who has been in that phase for a year and a half. And so what? The so what of that is that we don't have to necessarily address our trauma memories to recover. For some people, the ability to live day to day without any flashbacks, without anything else is enough for them. All right. But we have this absolute push from a lot of people, NHS and a lot of other organizations that say, right, to do this, you have to address your trauma memory. It's the biggest fallacy, going. You do not. You can talk about trauma recovery, how you recover from that. And trauma recovery is all about living daily life, being able to exist in the way that you want to exist and lead a normal life. But the third phase, integration, is really important. How do you learn the habits and tools that you take from that stabilization and safety, and also from traumatic recovery, from memory recovery, and incorporate them into your daily life, so that you're not going to get a re-attack of what it is that trauma may be. I mean, trauma it's such a vast subject, and I can waffle on about it for hours in depth, but I'll bore everyone senseless. But to me, that's the important bit, is there's a 3-step model for dealing with trauma. NHS hasn't probably got it, which is why some people go to a therapist and they say, this isn't working for me. It's actually having an adverse effect. And I get a lot of people coming from that side of the fence coming to me saying, look, can you help? And invariably, the approach that I do works really well with those people.
I'm sure. I was going to ask, are there some people more susceptible to PTSD? And as a second part of that question, is are elements of past trauma in your life beneficial when it comes to, especially maybe with the military, that you're going to see some pretty horrendous things? Do you have any beneficial parts of trauma that will come and actually, what brings me to mind? That movie Zero Dark 30.
Yeah.
Where that person just didn't want to go back to normal life. He liked to be in defusing bombs in Iraq. That was his thing. No
but
PTSD.
One would say that can be conditioning. You condition yourselves to be in that situation, and therefore you spend so long in that situation. This is why, Special Forces guys, a lot of the time, where they've done what they've done and they've lived in that environment for so long at such a high level of fight flight on an operational cycle that is continuous and non-forgiving, no different. It becomes this new normality, but it's a very false normality, because what then happens is when they leave, it's like falling off a cliff. There's no gradual descent into civilian life, and so they can no longer go kicking doors in. They can no longer sort of be that much their own sort of thinkers in what they do to a large degree. All of this sort of just falls away. But going back to what you were saying, it's by no surprise that the army recruits people from a diverse set of backgrounds. That means that they become very good at recruitment in Special Forces, right? A lot of the people there come from those background of family issues, personal issues, whatever it may be. There were bad boys in their regiment, and so, it is what it is. But that's what makes them so good at what they do. They combine together, the family becomes a regiment, that becomes their new family. In terms of having PTSD, I mean, there's a big difference between PTS and PTSD, right? So I think there are elements of things that happen in your life that give you resilience, all right, that build resilience. But it's how you learn from those and how you compartmentalize them and how you deal with them that builds that resilience. And what I mean by that is that if you just accept the trauma that's happened and go, okay, it's made me stronger, it may well do, but it may well come back to bite you. But if you can deal with it and deal with the trauma element of it and learn the lessons of why it happened and what you can do to move through it, then that's what I believe will make you, stronger in that environment.
Such a fascinating
think resilience
subject.
isn't about, but yeah, it is. And I think resilience isn't about bouncing back, in my view. It's about bouncing through. Everyone can bounce back, but why do I want to bounce back to where I was before? I want to learn from the experience that I've had. I want to put in the tools and habits, and therefore I want to go through. I want to bounce through, in terms of making myself a better individual and a better person.
Mm. Yeah, that's another topic we have spoken about before. The resilience aspect. I mean, how do you... psychologically speaking, there must be studies for us guys as ex-military guys, as they must have done a big study on who are the best people to recruit into the army itself. And you want people who are probably already have been subjected to trauma. You're picking a lot of kids out of the poorest neighborhoods in Britain. Well, not just Britain, every country, who are more inured already to the knocks of life than, let's say, I don't know, somebody who went to just a regular school in a nice, safe neighborhood. I think there is an aspect to that, but there's a lot to it. It is a very complicated subject. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think it's changing. Well, I think it's changing. So I think when we started off, well, certainly when I started off in 1989 back in the day, but it was a case of very much that you recruit for the job that we thought that we were going to do, whether that's the invading hordes across the German border or whether it's, whatever that may be. Times are very much definitely changing with the advent of AI, with cyber, with, all the more skillful technical tasks that we need to have. That I would say that combat soldier is always going to have to be there, but there's also needs to be very much a cognitive skill set that they need to have. And actually, some of the people that I've seen, from time when I was Colonel Mental Health, between 2019 and 2022, was that there was a far more soldiers with, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees than ever in, my day prior to 2008. And, it's much richer. The military is much richer for it if the military can adapt to allow them to use that skill set. And I think that's a whole new different story on that one.
Yeah, I talked about that with Charlie Herbert. We're talking about drone warfare and seeing people getting chased around by exploding drones. It's like something out of a horror film from the 80s, basically. It's like that's a recurring theme in those films back then. I just want to, because I was checking through your pretty impressive CV, and I come across the Liminal project. We're going to talk about that just before we finish up. That looks very interesting. Can you tell us about that?
So I was really hugely honoured in that I didn't know anything about it until I'd done some work in the United States with some of the SF guys over there, and developed a really close relationship with a lot of them. They saw what I was doing over here. There was conversation in the backgrounds from other people about what I was doing and how I was helping people. And I was introduced to the Liminal Collective by a really, good friend, or two good friends of mine, one called Brad, one called JR. And they effectively, when I looked into it, it's this amazing organization that brings together, high-level SF soldiers, cognitive therapists, people who are really top of their game, to be able to take people out of their comfort zone and push them to their limits and build resilience within whatever aspect they do, whether that's forces, whether that's corporate environment. Andy Walsh, who's there, was the ex-performance director of Red Bull. You've got Ben Potvin, who is a creative director of the Cirque du Soleil. And some people say, why have you got a creative director of the Cirque du Soleil? Because it brings this aspect of getting over fear in terms of body movement and flying from trapeze and all that sort of stuff. You've got an element. But one thing that they were not lacking, but one thing that they didn't have that was developed was, how can we bring people down from this, again, this high SNS arousal when they arrive, this fight flight that they're in, to be in a position quickly where they can take on what the Liminal Collective could deliver in terms of their training across the piece. And so we had a few conversations which basically said, look, there is definitely a place for performance mindfulness. And I use that term very gently, performance mindfulness, to sort of sit with people and say, okay, recognize that you're an automatic pilot, recognize that you're reactive, not responsive. How can you build some tolerance to what it is you're about to go through? What are the tools and techniques, whether that's breathing, whether that's, coming together. And there's a great exercise, which I do with a lot of people, which is called, workbench of the mind, which is, how do you put problems, not 100%ers, but sort of 40, 50%ers on an imaginal workbench of the mind and deconstruct them. So something you feel is a real threat to you or really difficult to you, actually, when you engage with it, you look at it, you actually deconstruct it, you realize it's not as big as you think it is. And that takes a lot of the power away from something that has become a phobia, a fear, or a worry. And so, the idea is that I will be used in that respect. I was never a great leader, I can assure you. But I was, I can be used in the respect of the mindfulness side to help people develop a mindset that gets them through the course, but then they can then develop for the rest of their life. And that's the whole thing with this, is that it's about a journey of mental health, good mental health, from day one, if you can, all the way through life, or in this case, when they join the Liminal Collective courses, all the way through. So, and they're pretty phenomenal in what they do and where they go. I mean, they take people to the middle of the desert, to the Arctic peaks, and they get people have climbed Everest to teach them. It's just incredible. I mean, it's worth having a look if you've never seen it before.
Anyone can go and do it
if you've got the money. Yeah.
Right.
So
well, how much is
it's not cheap.
Okay, that sounds expensive.
It is, but then you're paying for some of the world's best. Stand fast me. You're paying for some of the world's best people to take you on that journey, and the people that have done that journey have come out changed individuals. I mean, absolutely changed individuals.
And it mentioned Humanity 2.0. What does that entail? Is that just the next iteration in our evolution?
Yeah, just coming together, being understanding of each other, acceptance of each other, working out how we can join together and be, better at what we do. Whether that's shared knowledge, whether that's humility, whether that's, compassion, all of these things, which we lack in modern society in today. People are so tied up with their own problems and their own issues, to survive in a lot of cases, that we often forget the needs of others and how we can interact with others. And I think that one of the guiding lights of that is, how do we work together? How do we learn a mindset that can not only help us perform, but bring on those that are with us along on the journey as well.
What do you think? So I'll give you, I did a podcast with a guy last week, a guy I know who moved to Norway, and listen to the podcast. He's an excellent guest who went there with a girlfriend, they were to do a project on a fjord. They broke up. He went further up the side of the fjord, middle of nowhere, bought an old farm, hadn't been habited for 60 years. And he's been there for 3.5 years now, but they made a documentary on him, and it's absolutely fascinating. Actually, I'll send it to you after this. But he went through hell, basically, a form of PTSD, because he's a very gregarious guy, and you could say, he's very extrovert, like, very cheeky chappy type jokester, but fun to hang around with, and had a bit of sparkle on him. It's the guy you kind of want to hang around with. But he, what got him in the end, well, it didn't get him, but it hit him very, very badly, was the loneliness aspect. But how he's bounced back, and what he's figured out by effectively, it's like the old story of going out into the desert or into a cave or up the top of a mountain and being on your own until you figure out where the answers are. And he's gone through that process. And so we were chatting about this on Saturday, so a couple of days ago, and we were talking about I think there's a big problem that people have is a lack of connection to nature. And I don't just mean, going in the woods and having a, what do you call those primal screaming sessions. I'm talking about going up with a group of guys, whatever it's going to be, and go and do, walking up and down mountains, especially being away from, because you're out of cell internet reception. There's no internet reception. There is 4G or 5G or whatever, but If you go a bit higher up, there's none. So the aspect of disconnecting from society, disconnecting from the internet, and having a reconnection of just basically a bit of manual labor, chopping logs, things like that, eating off of a fire, and getting just to have a bit of a reset. And whether or not that's something, because that sort of thing appeals to me personally, and I go camping with my family and stuff, and we do that kind of thing anyway. But what's for you, from your perspective, are these things just like a sticky plaster over a gaping wound, or is this something that is beneficial to people?
No, so I would say that the ability to find yourself, if you want to use that word, is hugely powerful. We've become people that have dependence on our phones, or on social media, on everything else for a dopamine hit. There are people that exist that on social media just to post, just to get the dopamine hit so they can feel that they're loved or liked or whatever it may be. There are people that use social media because they're just addicted to it. So we've forgotten how to be at one with ourselves. We've forgotten how to use the body as a radar for just what's going on with ourselves. And, very often, if you take it to the extreme, I go away on a week's retreat and not a word is said from the day that you go in to the day that you leave. To some people, that'd be an absolute nightmare. But what it does do is it really does, get you to focus in on yourself. Focus in on what's going on with your body, because the body's a radar for the mind. The body will never lie, but the mind will lie to you on a daily basis, right? That sort of whole thing. And very much we've forgotten how to sort of combine the two together, the body and mind. We've also got this reliance on technology, which has become fairly toxic, and not fairly toxic, very toxic. And I fear for our children's generation, in terms of how they will engage in that sort of area in its own right. But for me, I can only speak from my own experience, but obviously I know lots of people that have done it as well. The ability to go somewhere and recognize the space that you're in, whether that's the nature around you, the ability to look at how often do you walk down a city street and look up what's there. Some of the most amazing architecture in London actually isn't on the ground, it's in the air. But we miss it because we don't look and take that time to see it. The ability for us to go for a run and not plug ourselves into a headset, but to just enjoy the sounds and the sensations that we're hearing, to go past people and actually engage and say hello, rather than just walk past in a different frame of mind, is hugely powerful. And why? Because it really helps us bring us down from wherever we are into this, what I was saying before about this window of tolerance. The problem is that you come out of that environment generally really refreshed, really sort of upbeat and looking at a new way of doing things. But, very quickly you get into the real world and you're hijacked again. So the secret is how do you put the boundaries in that you're not hijacked, whether that's, not having electronic, using electronic stuff after 6 o'clock in the evening, setting your boundaries that you're not going to answer emails between here and here, whatever it may be. And it's different for everyone, but it's really finding out what works for you and ensuring that you incorporate it into your life and make it a habit. That's the key thing.
Do you fancy coming?
Yeah,
you could be our in-house psychologist.
No, I do it. I mean, I'm not a clinical psychologist, but
I know.
But I would. I think mindfulness in those situations. It's interesting. Up the road from where I live, I was asked by an American billionaire to build a retreat part aspect to his house that would do exactly what we're talking about. And there's a lake, there's a forest, there's the large piece of river, there's a mindfulness room, there's a whole raft of things. And I'm hugely excited by that, because even putting it around my own network of people saying, look, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm going to do there, I'm already inundated by people wanting to do it. So it's something that people want to do. I think it has a really strong place if you do it in the right place. And Norway, I know well from my sort of commando helicopter pilot days, but it is the most beautiful place to do it. And I think that makes a huge difference to somebody.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, I'm so interested to hear about this retreat. I wish someone
Come
would.
along.
I mean, what I would like to do is I would like to come and. I just having the thought there. I was like to come and walk around it with you.
Yeah, do.
And see what you're planning to do with it, because it'd be kind of useful for us. Because what I'm thinking with another guy who was in our regiment and a few other guys I know who do retreat type things, but it's more sort of physical, or you know what I mean. It's going away somewhere beautiful and just reconnecting. We'll call it that, which I think is fun. It's always a good laugh. Sitting around the campfire.
Yeah, and then there's a massive campfire on the edge of the river with about 10 massive wooden chairs all in a circle, and it's gravel, and you can do barbecues there. You sit there, you just have beer, whatever it is you chop. But I often thought, actually, funny enough, when I was looking at this podcast, is how easy would it be to get the cohort of battalion officers, or jocks round there and have that retreat. Would there be this sort of very stoical sort of, well, no, not for me type thing, not where I want to go. But it's very interesting that what my sergeant major in the company, who then became RSM, I reconnected with recently, an absolutely amazing guy.
Who was that?
Alex Anderson. And people have mellowed over the years. From what I knew him as I was a subaltern getting battered around the head by him on a regular basis, rightly so. And my platoon sergeant John McDermott, who's sadly no longer with us. But I think that from meeting him now, he's in a completely different mindset. And even speaking to Nick, to Nick Boughton, who was adjutant and always going to be the general, he's in a different mindset than he was in the regiment, in a good way. Incredible man, done amazing things, and I'm sure Charlie is as well. It would be really interesting to get that group of officers round that fire and just talk, because I am damn sure that it would be exceptionally therapeutic on many, many levels.
Yes. Wow.
There's your task, Nicol.
That's a good one. And I could make that happen. I'm pretty sure I could make that happen.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Well, these things happen for a reason. And these podcasts, always something comes out of them. There's always something comes out of them. But that would be fantastic. I think, if you, with our background, organizing things isn't very daunting. You get quite good at it. Yeah. And I don't think it'd be a problem getting people to come. But what I'm trying to think about is the program. And but it's exciting. It's very interesting.
The program is there. The program is there. The program is tested. The program works. I run it with people already, not at this place because it's not quite finished. It'll be finished in about a month or two's time. But the power of, and actually where it's really powerful, which is when you bring the wives or the partners along as well. Because very often we all know from PTS that the individual is dealing with it on themselves, and they're transferring that onto family life, and the partner is picking up the pieces and trying to do everything, but not understanding the why of why they're going through X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And
I found that very much with doctors in COVID, when I was working with doctors who were surgeons who were taking death and everything else home with them of an evening, couldn't decompress. So that's a really important dynamic of it as well, which so it doesn't turn into just a beer fest and not much work gets done. There is an element of of both sides of it as well.
Yeah, I was actually thinking more of down the line of no alcohol.
Yeah, well, I don't drink, so it's great.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but that's Tim. That was really fun. You said you're going to bore us, but no, not at all. Not at all. But it's. I know it's hard to condense into an hour.
Yeah, this is so much
actually about what we were just been talking about. It's a very complicated subject, but a lot of the guys still listen. A lot of the soldiers listen, and I've done quite a few episodes on PTSD, and actually, they're using plant medicines and
That's a
psychedelics.
whole psychedelics
Different.
is a whole new podcast.
Yeah. I've done that with other guys as well. So
Yeah.
other people have come on and talked about it. But I just want to thank you for coming on.
You're welcome.
Do you, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Have you got a website or something?
Yeah, just
through me.
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't have a website. I purposely don't. Interestingly, I got trolled so many times for trying to help people that I just gave up. So everything that I do now is by referral, and I have a absolutely full list. So it's which I enjoy. But the one thing I would say is that any of the brethren are out there that do want to have a chat or talk, and I talk to a lot, rank range from general down to private soldier. So just get in touch, and I'm more than happy to do that. I've been doing it for 15 years. I'll continue doing it, and it's what I love. So yeah,
perfect. All right. Well, Tim Boughton, thanks very much for coming on, and thanks for listening.
You're welcome. Thanks, Nickel.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.